Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Today we're continuing our look at the book of Genesis, following on the heels of a series on the image of God. And today we're going to explore Genesis chapter 3 verses 1 through 7. The partnership in mutuality and vocation begins to become unraveled in this chapter. It's a sobering and bleak picture of what happens when humans fail to trust God. God had brought the man a woman so that together they could keep God's command and care for the garden. But in this story, they fail precisely in guarding the garden and in strengthening each other for obedience to God's command. So a couple of things I want to show you as the story begins. There's some word plays going on in Hebrew that we miss in English. So the very last verse of chapter 2, verse 25 says, "And the two of them were naked, the human and his wife, but they were not ashamed." The word naked in Hebrew is arom. And here, because it's talking about both of them being naked, it uses the plural arumim. And then chapter 3 begins by telling us, "Now the snake was craftier than all the beasts of the field that Yahweh God had made." And the word for craftier is the word arum, which should sound familiar. Arum, arom. These are identical consonants, just a different vowel. And so the humans were naked, but the snake was crafty, and we're immediately wondering how they're going to interact with each other. Now, the fact that there's a snake who presents this proposition to the woman is also interesting because the word snake in Hebrew is nachash, and it sounds almost identical to the word for divination, nachash. It's the same consonants. Both have A vowels. One has the long A vowel and the other has the short A vowel. So the snake is in fact going to propose to the woman that she desire to know good and evil for herself rather than trusting God, which is precisely what divination tries to do, is tries to discern what is good without appealing to God himself. So those two word plays set us up for the scene that is about to unfold, in which the snake is going to call into question what God has said to the man and the woman. He begins by asking, did God really say that y'all may not eat from every tree of the garden? I'm reading here from my own translation. And his question here is confusing because it's all twisted and inverted. God in fact said that they could eat from any tree in the garden except one. But the snake poses the question in such a way that the woman has to sort of back her way out of it. And she says, "From the fruit of the garden trees we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God said, y'all may not eat from it, and y'all may not touch it, lest you die." And here the snake begins to call into question what God has said to them and God's intentions or motivations behind that command. He says, "Y'all will not surely die, for God knows that on the day y'all eat from it, that y'all's eyes will be opened and y'all will become like God, the one who knows good and evil." The reason that I've used the word y'all in my translation is so that I can notice every time the snake is referring to commands that God gave to both of them. Because although he's carrying on a dialogue only with the woman, the man is standing right there beside her. We find that out in verse 6. "Thus the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise. She took from its fruit, and she ate, and she gave even to her husband with her, and he ate." So a few things to note. The snake is not called Satan in this text, and it does not explicitly try to get them to eat the fruit, but it does call into question God's goodness. In verse 5 it says, "God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you'll become like God." And so it raises this possibility that God is holding out on them, that in fact God has goodness that he's withholding, and that the people would be better off to seize this goodness for themselves rather than waiting for God to give it to them. So he says, God knows your eyes will be opened, and sure enough, after they eat the fruit, it says in verse 7, the eyes of the two of them were opened. but they weren't opened in the way that the man and the woman expected. Instead of knowing good and evil, they realized their own nakedness. The thing they came to know painfully in that first moment is their own shame. The big question that this text holds out to us as readers is, will we trust that God's instructions are for our own good, or will we insist on finding out the hard way for ourselves? Will we help each other obey, or will we stand by silently or even curiously while others choose their own destruction? I've already noted that the man was standing right beside her as this conversation unfolds, and the whole point in making the woman to bring companionship for the man was so that they could together obey God's command. But now the humans hide from God and hide their bodies from each other. It says they sewed together fig leaves to make for themselves a belt. They heard the sound of Yahweh God moving about the garden in the windy time of day, so the man hid himself and his wife from the face of Yahweh God in the midst of the trees of the garden. So we have this tragedy of the humans who were created to have intimate communion with each other and with God are now hiding from each other, and they're hiding from God. Next week, we'll look at the devastating consequences of their failure to trust God. But I want to leap ahead to verse 21, which leaves us with a portrait of God's mercy. In verse 21, we're told that God makes coverings for the man and the woman to hide their shame. He provides clothes for them, far better than the clothes they tried to provide for themselves. It's not as though they needed coverings from an existential point of view. They've been living just fine without them. But God provides what they need to deal with their own sense of shame, which shows us the matchless grace of God. I've drawn in this episode on the work of John Goldingay in his new commentary on the book of Genesis in the Baker Commentary on the Old Testament Pentateuch series. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. And I thought this would be a fun time to give you a sneak preview of a project I'm working on. Many of you know, if you've watched the early Torah Tuesday videos, that I'm writing a commentary on Exodus. And here you get to be the first people to see the cover. It won't be out for a few more years. I still have a lot of work ahead of me, but I'm excited to see what it's going to look like. So I appreciate your prayers as I work on that project. Thanks for watching. Please share this with others that you think could benefit from it, and have a great week.